Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Dustin Smith, and in this video I want to encourage you to participate in the Great Commission, and in doing so to participate in the Great Commission with passion for sharing your faith and taking the things that you have been taught and equipping other people with those very important truths. And I want to draw on a bunch of passages in order to make this particular point. Some passages that people might not typically put together, but I think make the most sense when you actually look at them side by side. So the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the church in Ephesus, which surprisingly we actually know a lot about in the New Testament. And I want to start in the book of Acts. I want to start in the book of Acts to show how the church in Ephesus actually had a lot of success in their evangelism and their preaching of the gospel. Particularly Paul and those around him were so successful at preaching the gospel that the people that were making idols for a living were going out of business. So when Paul would preach the gospel, he of course would tell them that, hey, you have to turn from your idols and you can only worship one God, and that one God is the Father alone. And so they would be those that listened and responded to Paul's gospel would be giving up their idols. They would be giving up their idolatrous worship, and they would be no longer purchasing these little figurines of the goddess Artemis. And of course, the goddess Artemis was the most popular goddess in Ephesus. There was an ancient temple dedicated to Artemis in the first century. So let's look at this passage. This passage is out of Acts chapter 19, and I'm going to start in verse 22. And it says, "And having sent into Macedonia two of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, he himself," this is Paul, "he himself stayed in Asia for a while." So this is not the Asia that we know today. This would be Asia Minor. Modern day would be Turkey, but this basically consists of the regions of the seven churches that you see in Revelation chapters 2 through 3. So this is the area that we're talking about. But it's going to zero in very quickly to talk about one of those cities, namely Ephesus. Now, Ephesus in the ancient world was a massively important city. I think it's in the top 4 in regard to population, behind Rome itself and Alexandria and maybe Athens, but it's definitely there in the top 4. Something like 150,000 people in the first century, which might not seem like a lot from our modern standards, but from the ancient world standards, that was quite a lot of people. So this is not a small podunk town. This is a very, very massive town, certainly in the top 5 in the world for population. Okay, verse 23. "About that time there occurred no small disturbance concerning the way." This is Luke's kind of interesting way of saying that the way did cause a very large disturbance. What is this large disturbance that was actually caused? Verse 24, "For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis," that's the goddess that the Ephesians would be very much interested in worshiping, those that lived in Ephesus. So Demetrius was bringing no little business to the craftsmen, meaning he was bringing a lot of business to the craftsmen. "These he gathered together with the workmen of similar trades and said, 'Men, you know that our prosperity depends on this business.'" What business? The making of idols. Verse 26. "You see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a considerable number of people, saying that gods made with hands are no gods at all." And so here he is acknowledging what Paul did. He's acknowledging that Paul is extremely successful in his evangelism. He has been, with the help certainly of the church in Ephesus, converting people to monotheism, away from polytheism. And in doing so, they have to give up their idolatrous practice. And the people that are making these small idolatrous figurines to devote to Artemis, or maybe they're even figurines of Artemis herself, they're going out of business. So the gospel is being preached, and it's having a massive impact on the world. In fact, as we saw there in verse 23, there was no small disturbance concerning the way. Okay, verse 28. "When they heard this, they were filled with rage and began crying out, saying, 'Great is Artemis of the Ephesians,'" because that's actually what people do, and they get very, very upset. They just start yelling and shouting at the top of their lungs. We've seen a lot of that over the last 4 years. So what we actually see here is that the people get very, very upset at what Paul is doing. And of course, whenever the Christian church is going to have a lot of success, the other side is going to respond in a way that seems like they are enraged and somewhat irrational. So, verse 29, the city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed with one accord into the theater, dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia. So why did they get Aristarchus and Gaius? Well, presumably they were with Paul as Paul was preaching the gospel, and they were the only ones that they could find. They were kind of the known accomplices of Paul, and this indicates, of course, that Paul was not preaching the gospel by himself. There's no way that one single person is going to be converting all these people in Ephesus. That's going to bring about this economic shift that would result in a mob of this course. So when was Paul in Ephesus doing his missionary work? Well, this is sometime in the 50s of the first century. So I want us to fast forward a generation. Let's move into the 90s, and we're going to look at a different text. We're going to look at the letter to Ephesus within the book of Revelation, because the book of Revelation contains within it 7 letters in Revelation chapters 2 through 3. And in Revelation 2, 1 through 7, we have the letter that's given to Ephesus. So I do think we have very good and convincing reasons as to why Revelation was written in the 90s, somewhere between like 90 and maybe 95. So this is a generation after Paul had had all that success in Ephesus, and the church, of course, was responsible for that success as well. So look at what is said here, starting in Revelation chapter 2, verse 1. To the angel of the church of Ephesus write, the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and the one who walks among the 7 golden lampstands says this. Now we know earlier from Revelation chapter 1, that the 7 golden lampstands are designed to be an image representing the 7 churches. And so Jesus is the one that is walking among the 7 lampstands. That means that he is walking among the churches. It's also interesting to note that the church is being defined as a lampstand, which has this imagery of something that is giving off light, that is actually producing light, that is bringing light to darkness, that is a positive, illuminating purpose. And so it's interesting to see how Jesus is defining the church with this particular metaphor. Okay, first thing Jesus does is that he tells them what they've been doing well. Okay, here are your good marks. Verse 2, I know your deeds and your toil and your perseverance, and that you cannot tolerate evil men. You put them to test who call themselves apostles, but they're not, and you found them to be false. So here Jesus commends them. He says, I know your deeds, your works. Whoever tells you that good works are unimportant in Christianity, you need to listen more carefully to Jesus, because Jesus compliments good deeds and good works. And not only that, they have their toil, their hard work, their labor, and their perseverance, which is a endurance, a steadfast commitment, which is also a nonviolent endurance. And of course, they have the traveling apostles that are coming to them, and they're saying, hold on, we're going to put you to the test, and we're going to find out that you are false apostles. Verse 3, he moves into the present. You have, present tense, you have perseverance, and you have endured for my name's sake, and you have not grown weary. Okay, those are all good things. Verse 2 and 3, Jesus commends the church, and it's interesting to see the things that they are being commended for. Doing good works, working very, very hard, persevering, being faithful, being nonviolent in their endurance, testing those that show up at the door that claim to be apostles and proving that they're false. Again, being commended for their perseverance. And they have endured in that persevering, faithful attitude on behalf of Jesus' name, and they have not grown weary to the point where they have given up. Okay. Verse 4 starts with but. Big contrast. But I have this against you, that you have left your first love. And a lot of people speculate and argue as to what this actually means. What does it mean that you have left your first love? Now, Jesus doesn't further define it for us modern readers. And I think the assumption there is that the Ephesians would know exactly what he's talking about. Whatever their first love was, whatever the thing is that they were passionate about at the beginning, that's what they have left behind. Now, notice he doesn't say that you have stopped loving. He doesn't say that. Some people have read that into the text, but I don't think that's what's being said there. If they were not being very loving, then I think he would have worded it a little bit differently. But he says, you have left your first love. And then we can get a couple of clues by reading verse 5 to see the way that Jesus encourages them to course correct and to regain the thing that they were passionate about and that they loved from the beginning. So we can see there in verse 5, he says, therefore, because he has this against them, that they have left their first love, therefore, remember from where you have fallen. That's the first thing they're told. Remember from where they have fallen and repent, okay? And do the deeds you did at first. There's that time, that temporal language there. The deeds that you did at first, okay? So their first love involved doing a certain type of deed that they were passionate about and that they loved doing. They have fallen from it. They have forgotten about this, and they need to repent and they need to turn back into that. And then he says, or else, the part that nobody likes to read. Or else, I am coming to you, and I'm going to remove your lampstand out of its place unless you repent. Okay, so we'll come back and talk about that. But I do think there's a very likely way to read verse 4 that makes sense with the history of the church of Ephesus that we actually have in Acts chapter 19. And I think this is made sensible by regarding their first love as their love and their passion for evangelism. They loved sharing their faith. They loved preaching the gospel. They loved telling people about the one true God and his son, his human son, and the kingdom that he is going to bring in light of his death and resurrection and his second coming. So I think their first love is what we actually see in the book of Acts. The thing that they were so passionate about, they were so successful at, that it led to the idol makers going out of business. And it caused an uproar, it caused a riot, and it caused a bunch of Christians to be rounded up into the theater. And you can read the rest of Acts chapter 19 to see how that actually got resolved. The point is, it's unavoidable that Acts chapter 19 indicates that Ephesus was known a generation earlier for their love and their passion for evangelism, for preaching the gospel. Here, Jesus says, you've lost your first love. And then notice, if their first love was their love and their passion for evangelism, then it actually starts to make a lot more sense what he's saying in verse 5. Remember from where you have fallen, okay? You were doing really well, and you have fallen from that. You've fallen from that opportunity of having the open door to preach the message, and they're to repent. They're to go back to actually having this passionate attitude, this mindset of loving to share their faith, and do those deeds that they did at first. Go do this. Otherwise, Jesus is going to come and he's going to remove their lampstand. He's going to remove the thing that identifies them as a light to the world, which again is a metaphor that's appropriate for a church that's, guess what, preaching the gospel. That makes a lot of sense. Now, here's the thing that's interesting from an application standpoint. You can go do the Bible tours today. You can go to the Middle East. You can go to Turkey right now, and you can go to Ephesus, and you can see the ruins. But you know what you're going to find? You're going to find that there is no Christian church in Ephesus today. There's no church in Ephesus today. And what that tells me is that Jesus warned this church. He says, look, if you don't repent, if you don't have passion for preaching the gospel, if you don't remember from where you have fallen and to do the deeds that you love doing at first, I'm going to come and I'm going to take away your lampstand. And we know the lampstand is an image for the church. And guess what? Jesus came through with this promise. He has removed that lampstand because there is no church in Ephesus today. And what this tells me as a Christian is that I have the responsibility to share my faith in whatever opportunities that I find myself. Whatever I have learned, I need to take that and I need to help make disciples. I need to baptize them, and I need to teach these disciples to observe everything that Jesus taught. And I think this should be the application for all of us as well, that preaching the gospel is not optional. Sharing our faith is not an optional part of Christianity. We have been entrusted with these truths. That means that they're not for us, they're for us to share with other people. And we have all of these examples in the Bible of people that were faithful in sharing their faith and making disciples and teaching others to observe what Jesus commanded. And my encouragement to everybody here is to be faithful to that commission. Whatever little you know, you might not think that you know much. You might not think that you know a lot. But whatever you have, take that and share it with other people. It could be in your own household, with your spouse, with your children. It could be in your neighborhood. Could be at your workplace. Could be in your community. It could be with your friends. Could be with a variety of people. But take what you have, be faithful with it, and let's share the gospel so that instead of Jesus threatening us that he's going to come and remove our lampstand, Jesus will, on the day of judgment, at his second coming, say, well done, good and faithful servant. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and we'll see you next time.